Hello. Tonight we step into a place most people only dream of visiting through faded photographs and carefully edited documentaries. Imagine waking before first light in a thatched hut raised on low stilts, the air already thick enough to drink. No gentle dawn chorus here. Instead, the jungle presses in immediately, alive and indifferent. This is not the romantic lost world of vine-draped temples glowing in golden sunlight. This is the Maya lowlands in the Classic period, somewhere between 250 and 900 CE, in what we now call the Petén region of Guatemala, northern Belize, or the southern Yucatan, and you have just opened your eyes to your first full day in it. The heat arrives even before the sun clears the canopy. At dawn, the temperature already hovers near 28 degrees Celsius. But the real weight is the humidity, consistently 90 to 100%. You sit up, and the thin cotton of your tunic clings instantly to your skin. Every movement feels like pushing through warm soup. Sweat beads on your forehead, runs into your eyes, and there is nowhere for it to evaporate. Within minutes, your body is coated in a slick film that never quite dries. Breathing feels shallow because the air itself is heavy. Each inhale delivers less oxygen than your lungs expect. Your heart rate climbs just from lying still. This is not discomfort. This is your physiology being reminded, minute by minute, that it was not designed for this place. You step outside. The ground under your bare feet is soft, black soil that smells of wet decay and fermenting leaves. No crisp forest floor here. Everything rots fast, and the rot feeds more green. 50 meters in any direction, the vegetation forms a green wall so dense that sunlight fractures into thin, shifting spears before it reaches the ground. Vines as thick as your wrist loop between massive ceiba and sapodilla trees. Strangler figs coil around their hosts like slow pythons, and every surface trunk, branch, even the undersides of leaves is coated in moss, lichen, bromeliads. The Maya called this world Karks, the forest. But to an outsider it feels less like scenery and more like a living organism that has already decided you do not belong. Sound never stops. Cicadas produce a continuous, high-pitched drone that seems to come from inside your skull. Howler monkeys roar in the distance, their calls carrying for kilometers, deep and guttural. Closer, smaller birds give sharp, metallic chirps. Beneath it all runs the low buzz of countless insects, mosquitoes mostly, but also no-see-ums, deer flies, and sweat bees that land on any exposed skin and bite without warning. You wave a hand to clear them, and 10 more take their place. By mid-morning, the whine is so constant, it becomes background, the way traffic noise does in a city. Except this noise wants your blood. And then there are the things that do not announce themselves. Fer de lance, the Barber amarilla, lies coiled in leaf litter exactly the color of dead vegetation. One step too close, and the snake strikes faster than thought. Its venom causes massive tissue damage and internal bleeding. Most bites in this era were not immediately fatal, but without modern antivenom, the infection and necrosis that followed often were. Jaguars move silently through the understory at dusk and dawn. An adult male weighs up to 120 kilograms. One swipe can break bone. The Maya revered the jaguar as a lord of the night, but reverence did not stop attacks on children, on lone farmers, on anyone who strayed too far from the village path after dark. You walk a narrow trail toward the maize field. Roots and vines snatch at your ankles. Thorns tear shallow lines across your shins. Within an hour, small wounds begin to sting, then burn as bacteria and fungi find their way in. In this climate, any cut becomes a tropical ulcer within days open, weeping sores that refuse to heal. Your feet, unused to constant damp, start to soften and crack. Fungal infections set in between the toes. You have been awake less than 3 hours, and already your body is sending signals of distress, dizziness from fluid loss, nausea from heat stress, a deep ache in muscles that have not yet adapted. The Maya who lived here were not visitors. They were born into this pressure cooker. Their bodies adjusted over generations, longer limbs for heat dissipation, higher sweat rates, slightly increased lung capacity. Their immune systems learn to fight the parasites that thrive in standing water and poorly cooked meat. Hookworm, roundworm, giardia, malaria-carrying mosquitoes. They knew which plants eased fever, which leaves repelled insects when rubbed on skin, which trails avoided snake habitat. You have none of that knowledge. Your modern body, accustomed to air conditioning, clean water and shoes, is a stranger here. Every system is working overtime just to keep your core temperature stable. Your kidneys strain to conserve water. You are losing faster than you can replace it. Your electrolytes drop. Mild heat exhaustion creeps in before noon. This is the first truth the jungle teaches. The environment is not a backdrop. It is the primary opponent. The cities of Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque rose from this same forest, their whitewashed pyramids and plazas hacked out of the green, but the green never truly retreated. It waited. It infiltrated. It wore down stone and bone alike. The people who built those cities did not conquer the jungle, they negotiated with it, day after day, generation after generation. One misstep, one season of bad rain, one overlooked infection, and the balance tipped. You pause at the edge of a small milpa, a slash-and-burn field still smoking faintly from last month's burn. The maize is only knee-high. The sun has cleared the trees now, and the heat climbs toward 35 degrees Celsius. Insects swarm thicker. A trickle of sweat runs down your spine, and you realize your tunic is soaked through. Somewhere deeper in the forest, a branch snaps, maybe a peccary, maybe something larger. Your pulse jumps. And already you understand why the Maya worldview placed such weight on ritual, on offerings, on keeping the world in motion. Because standing here, skin burning, lungs laboring, insects drilling into every unprotected inch, you feel how thin the line is between continuing and simply stopping. In the distance, faint through the leaves, comes the low pulse of a wooden slit drum calling people to the day's labor. The day has barely begun. The low pulse of the wooden slit drum fades into the morning mist as you turn away from the milpa and follow the narrow path back toward the village. The sun is higher now, burning through gaps in the canopy, but the heat feels secondary to something heavier settling over you. The awareness that nothing in this day or any day belongs entirely to you. Time here is not a river you float down. It is a machine of interlocking wheels, and you are one small cog pressed between them. The Maya measured existence with calendars more precise and more demanding than anything most ancient societies possessed. They tracked not one cycle, but several running at once, each layer adding weight to daily decisions. The most sacred was the Tzolkin, a 260-day round, created by combining 13 numbers with 20 named days, Imix, Ik, Akbal, Khan, and so on through to Ahar. Every child born received the name of their Tzolkin day, and that name carried a portion of destiny. If you were born on 8 Lamat, the books of Chilambalam would later say you were destined for a life touched by brightness and abundance, but also by sudden change. If you were 1 Kimi, death and transformation shadowed your path from the beginning. Priests consulted these omens at birth, deciding whether the newborn should be raised for labor, for minor ritual roles, or very rarely for something higher. Your entire temperament, your suitability for marriage, your risk of illness, all partially fixed by the stars and numbers the moment you drew breath. Overlaid on the Tzolkin was the hub, a 365-day solar year divided into 18 months of 20 days each, plus 5 nameless unlucky days called Wabe at the end. The two calendars interlocked like gears. Only once every 52 Harb years, 18,980 days, did the same Tzolkin and Harb date coincide. That rare alignment, the calendar round, marked the completion of a full cycle and was celebrated with fire ceremonies and the renewal of household hearths. Most people lived their entire lives without ever witnessing one. Beyond these everyday counts stretched longer periods that gave shape to history itself. A ton was 360 days. 20 tons made a cartoon of roughly 19.7 years. 20 cartoons formed a backtoon of nearly 394 years. The long count calendar inscribed these units on stone monuments, anchoring royal deeds to an absolute timeline that began in what we calculate as 3114 BCE. When a king dedicated a new stela, he recorded not just the solar date, but the exact position in the long count, 9.10.0.0, 0, for example, or 10.0.0.0, 0. These numbers were not abstract. They were proof that the present moment rested on the bones of previous creations and would someday feed the next one. Priests and astronomer scribes served as the keepers of this machinery. From the tops of pyramids, or from special platforms aligned to solstices and Venus risings, they watched the sky with naked eyes and wooden sighting tools. They recorded the movements of Venus morning star and evening star, because Venus was the warbringer, tied to the god Kukulkan and to raids for captives. They tracked eclipses, predicting them with enough accuracy to warn communities that the sun was about to be bitten. Failure to perform the correct appeasement rituals could mean the sun never returned, or so the cosmology taught. For you, the common farmer, this knowledge arrives not as abstract astronomy, but as obligation. Every major agricultural step burning the field, planting, weeding, harvesting, must align with favorable days. Planting on a bad day risks crop failure, which means hunger for your household and shame before the community. Marriage negotiations wait for auspicious dates. A union sealed on the wrong Tzolk'in position might doom the couple to infertility or early death. Even naming a child, settling a dispute, or beginning a journey requires consultation with a daykeeper. You cannot simply decide. You must ask the calendar first. And the calendar's answers come with consequences. The priests explain that the gods sacrificed themselves to create the present world. The maize god gave his flesh so humans could eat. The hero twins defeated the lords of the underworld so the sun could rise. In return, humans owe continual payment in blood, incense, chants, and offerings. If the rituals falter, if too few auto-sacrifice piercings are made, if the ballgame offerings cease, if the incense stops rising, the cosmic engine stalls, rain fails, maize withers, the sun grows weak. You are told, quietly but repeatedly, that the continuation of daylight itself depends in part on human action, not the king's alone, everyone's. This creates a pressure unlike anything in a secular society. You wake knowing your small morning offering of copal smoke or a drop of blood from your tongue is one thread in a web that holds the sky in place. Miss it, and the drought that has already killed 2 neighbors' fields might deepen. Perform it correctly, and perhaps the clouds will gather. You never know for certain. Doubt is not permitted. Hesitation is dangerous. The result is a constant, low-level anxiety that the world's balance rests partly on your shoulders. You are not merely living in the cosmos. You are helping to keep it running. Children absorb this early. By age 5, they learn which days are safe for play, which require extra caution. By adolescence, they understand that personal desires, love chosen freely, work avoided, rest taken, when tired must bend to the greater rhythm. Individual freedom exists only in the narrow spaces the calendar leaves open. You reach the village edge now. Smoke rises from dozens of low huts. Women grind maize on metates, the stone rasping in steady 3-beat cycles. Men sharpen digging sticks with obsidian flakes. A young girl carries a water jar balanced on her head, stepping carefully so as not to spill a drop on an unlucky day. Everyone moves with purpose, but the purpose is never only their own. In the distance, a priest climbs the steps of a small temple platform, trailing white smoke from a censer. He will read the sky tonight, announce the portents for tomorrow, and tell the community which tasks the heavens permit. You feel the day stretching ahead, already mapped by forces you cannot see or argue with. And somewhere beneath that mapping lies the quiet question no one speaks aloud. How much of your life is truly yours? But as you stand there watching the priest ascend, censer smoke curling like a question mark against the morning sky, The weight of that unspoken doubt presses harder, because the answer is already clear. Almost none of it. Your place in this world was decided long before your birth, etched into a hierarchy as rigid as the stone pyramids rising from the jungle floor. In Maya society, roughly 9 out of 10 people lived as you do now, a mill, a common farmer bound to the soil and the demands of those above you. This was no loose collection of villages. It was a stratified kingdom where social mobility was a myth, and your role locked you into a cycle of labor that fed the gods, the kings, and everyone else before yourself. You moved through the village plaza, a packed earth space dotted with thatched roof houses, clustered around a modest ball court, and a few low platforms for community rituals. The air smells of wood smoke and the faint, sour tang of fermenting maize dough. Women kneel before mates, grinding corn with rhythmic back and forth motions, their hands calloused and dusted white. Children chase each other with sticks, mimicking the warriors they see in carvings, but soon enough they will join the fields. Your day begins in earnest as the first light strengthens. You grab a digging stick hardened by fire and a woven basket, then head back to the milpa you glimpsed earlier. The path winds uphill slightly, toward terraced fields carved into the slopes to prevent erosion in the heavy rains. These terraces, built and maintained by generations of hands like yours, trap soil and water, allowing maize to grow where the thin jungle earth might otherwise wash away. From dawn until the sun dips low, your world is this, bending over rows of maize, beans, squash, and chili plants. The Maya farmed intensively, using a system called slash and burn for new plots, felling trees with stone axes, burning the debris to enrich the soil, then planting for a few years before moving on to let the land recover. But in denser areas around cities like Tikal, they supplemented with raised fields in wetlands or jungle gardens, intercropping useful trees like cacao and avocado amid the wild growth. Your back aches from hours of weeding with a wooden hoe, the handle worn smooth by sweat. Blisters form on your palms where the tool rubs, but you push through, because stopping means less yield, and less yield means tribute shortfalls. As a mill, you owe portions of your harvest to the local noble who oversees your community, and through him to the Aha, the divine king. This tribute maize, cotton cloth, feathers, cacao beans, sustains the elite and funds their rituals and wars. You are not quite a slave in the sense of being bought and sold, but your labor is compulsory, tied to the land and the obligations of your lineage. Moving away or refusing means exile or punishment, enforced by the king's warriors. By midday, the sun beats down unrelentingly, turning the field into a haze of heat. You pause only briefly to eat a cold tortilla wrapped around beans, washed down with water from a gourd. Your diet revolves around maize ground into dough for tamales or tortillas, boiled into atole porridge, or fermented into a weak beer called chicha. Beans provide some protein, squash adds vitamins, but variety is limited. Wild game like deer or turkey appears rarely, usually reserved for festivals or the elite. Archaeologists studying Maya skeletons from this era find evidence of chronic malnutrition, shorter stature, porous bones from anemia, enamel defects on teeth from childhood hunger. You feel it in the constant low energy, the way your muscles tire faster than they should, the headaches that come when the rains delay and stores run low. Meals are small and repetitive, leaving a hollow in your stomach that never fully fills. Just like the people around you, you adapt by working through it, but the undernourishment weakens your resistance to the jungle's diseases, making every fever or infection a potential end. Across the plaza, beyond the fields, lies the world you glimpse but never enter the realm of the Aho and his court. In great city-states like Palenque or Copan, the divine king rules as Kuhulaho, Holy Lord, a title reserved for those who could trace bloodlines to the gods. Take Kinich Janab Pakal, who ascended the throne of Palenque in 615 CE at age 12 and reigned for nearly 70 years. His sarcophagus, discovered in the Temple of the Inscriptions, depicts him as the maize god reborn, surrounded by ancestors and cosmic symbols. Or Waxaclajun Uba Kawil of Copan, beheaded in 738 CE by a rival from Quirigua. his story carved on stele showing him as a conduit to the divine, his head becoming a vessel for visions. These kings were not mere rulers. They embodied the gods on earth, intermediaries between the human world, the heavens, and the underworld Xibalba. Their days unfold in cool, shadowed palaces adorned with painted murals and jade inlays. Attendants fan them with feather standards while scribes record decrees on bark paper codices. Politics consumes them, forging alliances through marriage, negotiating tribute from vassal lords, plotting against rivals like Kalakmal's Yuknum Chin II, who expanded his influence through strategic wars in the 7th century. War here is not for territory alone, but for prestige and captives, resources like obsidian for tools or quetzal feathers for headdresses. The Ahor's life pulses with ritual, piercing his own body to offer blood that nourishes the gods, consulting oracles for battle timings, presiding over ball games where the outcome mirrors cosmic struggles. Feasts feature chocolate drinks frothed with chili, venison, and exotic fruits, all served on polychrome pottery denied to commoners. The gap between your world and theirs is absolute, enforced by birth, custom, and force. Nobles, making up perhaps 5%, handle administration and warfare, their children trained in glyphs and astronomy. Artisans craft for the court, but even they live apart. You, the mill, provide the foundation. Your sweat builds the pyramids, one basket of earth at a time during off-seasons. Your produce fills the granaries. In return, the elite promise protection from enemies and favor from the gods. But crossing that divide, rare, almost impossible. A skilled warrior might rise slightly, but true ascent requires noble blood. The system traps you not with chains, but with necessity. Without the fields, no food. Without tribute, no rituals. Without rituals, no rain. As evening falls, you trudge home, body heavy from the day's toil. Smoke rises from cooking fires, and families gather in dim huts lit by pine torches. Laughter mixes with quiet talk of the harvest. In this moment, you feel the human thread connecting all elite or not. Everyone eats, sleeps, fears the dark. But then your gaze lifts to the distant pyramid, where torchlight flickers in the royal compound, and you know that shared humanity stops at the steps. A soft chant drifts from there, the sound of blood being offered in the gathering dusk, reminding you that the gods demand payment from all, but some pay in drops, while others pay in lifetimes. But as that distant chant of offering rises into the evening air, you understand that the day's labor was never just about filling your own stomach. It was payment in advance for something far larger, the continuation of everything. In the Maya understanding of the universe, the world did not run on its own momentum. It required constant nourishment, the same way a fire needs wood, or a child needs maize atole. That nourishment came in the form of ke, or chulel in some dialects, a sacred essence, a vital force that animated all things. Gods possessed it in abundance. Humans had only a limited supply. The dead in Xibalba guarded reserves of it. To keep the 3 levels of existence, heaven, earth, underworld, in balance, ke had to circulate, and the most potent, most direct carrier of ke was blood. Blood was the currency of the cosmos. Not gold, not jade, not cacao beans, though those had value in trade. Blood was the medium through which humans repaid the gods for the original sacrifice that created the current world. According to the stories passed down by elders and carved on temple walls, the gods had to destroy earlier failed creations before succeeding with the present one. In one account, the maize god allowed himself to be ground like corn so humans could eat. In another, the hero twins descended to Xibalba, endured trials, and emerged to allow the sun to rise. Every sunrise was therefore a reminder of debt. Every rain that fell on the milpa was interest paid on that debt. If payment stopped, the debt collectors, the gods, would foreclose. Droughts would lengthen. Crops would fail. The sun might refuse to climb again. The elite paid first and most visibly. Kings and high nobles practiced auto-sacrifice regularly, piercing their tongues with stingray spines, drawing cords studded with thorns through their ears or genitals, letting the blood drip onto bark paper or fall into a brazier where it rose as smoke to the sky. These acts were not private penance. They were public demonstrations of responsibility. A ruler who bled himself before a major decision planting season, war, a new building dedication, showed the community that he was willing to give what the gods demanded most. The pain was real, the blood loss measurable, the scars permanent. But the act reassured everyone. The king is paying, so the world keeps turning. Lower down the hierarchy, the offerings were smaller, but no less necessary. A farmer like you might prick a finger with a thorn or a fish spine on certain days, smear the drop on a maize cob before planting, or add it to the censer smoke during household rituals. Women sometimes offered blood from their tongues after childbirth. These small acts accumulated. They were the steady drip that kept the cosmic account from falling into arrears. Then came the larger transactions, the ritual ball game, pock to pock. You have seen the ball courts in your own village, and in the great cities, long, narrow alleys flanked by sloping walls, sometimes with stone rings set high. The game itself was fast and brutal. Players struck a solid rubber ball with hips, thighs, shoulders, never hands or feet. The ball was heavy, the court hard, injuries common. But this was never sport in our sense. It was theatre on a cosmic scale. The bouncing ball represented the sun or the moon moving through the sky. The court replicated the underworld passage. The outcome mirrored battles between forces of life and death. In some matches, the stakes were explicit. The losing captain, or occasionally the entire losing team, was sacrificed afterward. Decapitation, heart extraction, or being thrown down temple steps. The method varied, but the purpose was consistent. Their blood, rich with kur from a vigorous life, fed the gods directly. The crowd that gathered did not cheer for violence alone. They witnessed payment being made. War followed the same logic. Raids and battles between city-states were not primarily about seizing farmland or annexing territory in the way later empires fought. Land was abundant. Labor and captives were scarce. The highest military honor went to the warrior who took living prisoners rather than killed on the field. These captives, nobles if possible, commoners otherwise, were brought back in ropes, displayed in the plaza, then prepared for sacrifice. On the appointed day they ascended the temple steps, often drugged with balshay or pulque to dull fear. At the summit, 4 assistants stretched the captive over a stone altar shaped like a turtle shell. A priest, dressed as a god, struck once with an obsidian blade, removed the still-beating heart, raised it to the 4 directions, then placed it in a vessel or smeared it on the idol's face. The body was sometimes rolled down the steps, limbs disarticulated for ritual consumption by the elite, a way of absorbing the captive's strength and kur. The skull might be displayed on a tzompantli rack. Every stage reinforced the message. This life, given willingly or not, keeps the universe solvent. You are not exempt from this economy. As a mill, you stand on the lowest rung of potential sacrifice. In times of crisis, prolonged drought, defeat in war, a king's illness, the demand for offerings rises. When the great cities needed to appease angry gods, they sometimes took commoners from subject villages. You have heard the stories. A raid sweeps through at dawn. Warriors in padded cotton armor seize men and boys, bind them, march them away. The community mourns but does not resist openly. Resistance invites worse reprisal. You know your own village has paid such tribute before. You have seen families left with empty places at the hearth. The possibility sits quietly in the background of every day, the way lightning sits in a thunderhead. It is not paranoia. It is probability. Yet the most striking thing is not the fear itself, but the acceptance that grows alongside it. People do not spend their lives in constant terror. They perform the small rituals, attend the ceremonies, tell the children the stories, because the alternative cosmic collapse feels more frightening than any single death. Sacrifice is not an aberration. It is the operating system. The gods gave everything once. Humans give back in installments. Blood is the interest payment that prevents foreclosure. As night settles over the village, you sit by the low fire in your hut, listening to the insects and the occasional distant drum from the temple district. A neighbor's child asks why the stars move the way they do. The mother answers softly, because someone paid for them to keep moving. You add another small stick to the fire and watch the sparks lift, carrying with them the faint scent of copal you burned earlier. The offering was tiny, barely a drop. But in this system, even the smallest drop counts. Somewhere up the hierarchy, in the torchlit palace, a greater payment is being prepared, perhaps tonight, perhaps tomorrow. And you know that if the balance ever tips too far, the next payment might come from someone exactly like you. That quiet knowledge lingers as you stir from the fire and prepare for sleep. But rest brings no true escape, because the toll of living here has already etched itself into your bones and blood, long before any ritual demand arrives. The daily existence of a Maya farmer is a grind that wears down the body from the inside out, turning survival into a series of small, accumulating injuries. By your early 20s, you feel decades older, your frame marked by the relentless demands of the land and the limitations of what it provides. Start with the food that sustains you or fails to. Maize dominates every meal, providing the bulk of calories but little else. Ground into tortillas or porridge, it lacks key nutrients like iron, niacin, and complete proteins. Without enough beans or meat to supplement, anemia sets in early. Your blood carries less oxygen, leaving you fatigued after minimal effort. Dizziness hits during long hours in the field, your vision blurring as you swing a digging stick. Children show it first: pale skin, slow growth, constant tiredness. Women suffer worse during pregnancies, with higher risks of complications. To combat pellagra from niacin deficiency, the Maya learned to treat maize with lime water, a process called nixtamalization that releases bound nutrients, but even that does not fully bridge the gap. Hunger is not starvation most years, but a persistent undercurrent, a hollow that sharpens every other ache. Then come the infections that thrive in this environment. The jungle soil and water teem with parasites. Hookworms enter through bare feet, roundworms through contaminated food, amoebas through streams. They sap your strength further, causing diarrhea, bloating, weight loss. Malaria, carried by mosquitoes, brings recurring fevers that leave you shivering in the heat. Cuts from thorns or tools turn into tropical ulcers, deep, festering sores on legs and feet that resist healing in the humidity. Bone infections, or osteomyelitis, spread from those wounds or from untreated injuries, causing swelling, pain, and sometimes permanent limp. Archaeologists examining Maya remains find widespread evidence: pitted bones, fused joints from early arthritis. By age 30, your knees and back protest every squat and lift, the cartilage worn from years of carrying heavy loads over uneven ground. Those loads define your labor because there are no beasts of burden here. No oxen, no horses. The New World lacked them until Europeans arrived. Everything moves on human backs: baskets of soil for terraces, bundles of firewood, jars of water from distant cenotes. A single trip to the field might mean hauling 50 kilograms balanced on your tumpline, a strap across the forehead that distributes weight down the spine. Tools are basic: stone axes for felling trees, wooden digging sticks tipped with fire-hardened points, obsidian blades for cutting. No metal plows, no wheels for carts. Sharpening an obsidian flake takes skill, but it dulls fast against roots and rocks. Your hands blister, callous, crack. Shoulders knot from repetitive motions: weeding, planting, harvesting. Home offers little relief. Your hut is a single room of wattle and daub walls, sticks woven and plastered with mud, topped by a thatched palm roof. Inside, it is dim even at midday, lit only by sunlight filtering through the doorway or small gaps. No windows to avoid insects and rain. The floor is packed earth, cool but prone to flooding in wet season. You sleep on reed mats rolled out each night, shared with family. Cooking happens over an open hearth. 3 stones holding a clay comel. Smoke fills the space, no chimney to vent it. Eyes water, lungs burn from constant inhalation. Chronic respiratory issues follow, coughs, shortness of breath, weakened immunity. Infants and elders suffer most, but everyone bears it. The hut smells of smoke, sweat, maize, and the faint rot from thatch that needs replacing every few years. Yet amid this hardship, pain takes on another layer not just endured, but sought as a mark of status. Body modification begins in infancy, a deliberate reshaping to align with ideals of beauty tied to nobility and the gods. For elite children, and sometimes aspiring commoners, parents bind a wooden board to the forehead, flattening the skull into a sloping profile that mimics the maize god or the elongated heads in myths. The pressure is constant for years, causing headaches, but the result signals refinement. To induce cross eyes, another noble trait associated with visions and the sun god, a bead or resin ball dangles from the hair, forcing the eyes to converge. Squinting becomes permanent, a badge of elevated birth, even if it blurs distance vision. Teeth receive similar treatment. By adolescence, many have their incisors filed into points or T-shapes, then inlaid with jade, pyrite, or hematite. The process: a shaman drills into live enamel with a bow drill tipped in quartz sand. No anesthesia beyond perhaps a numbing herb. Pain shoots through the jaw, swelling lasts days, infection risks high. But the glittering smile elevates you socially, a visible investment in status. For commoners like you, these mods are rarer, but some pursue them to mimic the elite, hoping it brings favor or better marriage prospects. Pain becomes currency. Endure it, display it, and climb a rung, however slightly. This acceptance of suffering weaves into every hour. You rise before dawn, body stiff, to grind maize or fetch water. Midday brings heat exhaustion, evenings the smoke-filled hut. Parasites drain you, diet weakens you, labor breaks you down. Yet you persist because the alternative, falling behind, means failing your family, your community, the gods. As sleep finally claims you in the hut's close darkness, a faint ache pulses in your modified teeth, a reminder that even your body is not fully your own. Outside, the night sounds shift, and somewhere in the distance, a warrior's footfall echoes on a hidden trail. That faint echo of a warrior's footfall on the hidden trail pulls your thoughts toward the reality you try not to dwell on during daylight hours. War is never far in this world. It arrives not as sweeping conquest armies marching across open plains, but as sudden, targeted raids, slipping through the same dense jungle that shelters your fields. The purpose is precise and consistent, not to erase an enemy city, not to claim vast territories for permanent settlement, but to seize living people and symbols of power that feed the cosmic economy you already know too well. The goals of Maya warfare revolve around 3 main prizes. First and foremost, captives. A living prisoner carries more value than a corpse. Their blood, their hearts, their very ka can be offered on temple altars to sustain the gods, renew royal legitimacy, or avert disaster after a bad omen. A king who brings back dozens of high-status captives from a rival polity demonstrates his strength and the favor of the heavens. Second, the humiliation or replacement of a rival ruler. Defeating an enemy aha, forcing him to flee, or installing a puppet in his place shifts the balance of alliances and tribute flows without the need to occupy land. Third, control over trade routes and resources. The jungle yields little in bulk commodities, but certain items are priceless. Obsidian from highland sources for razor-sharp tools and weapons, jade from the Motagua Valley for royal ornaments, Quetzal feathers, whose iridescent green marks divine status. Raiding disrupts a rival's access to these goods while securing your own elite supply. Tactics reflect the terrain. No massive pitched battles on open fields here, the undergrowth forbids it. Instead, warfare favors ambushes and quick strikes. Warriors move in small groups along known trails, using the jungle's cover to approach unseen. Scouts climb trees to watch enemy movements. When the moment comes, the attack erupts from concealment. Arrows tipped with obsidian or flint, atlatl darts launched from throwing sticks, then a rush into close combat. The fight is chaotic, noisy, short, shouts, the crack of wooden clubs, the wet thud of bodies hitting the ground. Most engagements end within minutes once one side breaks and flees. The victors pursue only far enough to capture stragglers. Killing everyone defeats the purpose. As a meal, you are called up when your community's lord demands men. You are not a professional soldier. You train sporadically, practicing with spear and shield on the village plaza, but your main role remains the field. When the call comes, you receive basic gear: a short thrusting spear called batab, a hardwood club studded with obsidian blades, the maquawitl. Though the full Aztec-style version was later and rarer here, a padded cotton tunic for minimal protection, a small round shield of woven cane or wood. No metal armor, no horses. You fight barefoot or in sandals, moving through vines and roots you know from daily labor. The goal in battle is simple: take prisoners alive. A warrior who captures an enemy noble gains immense prestige, land grants, titles, a higher place in the tribute hierarchy. Killing outright brings less honor. So the combat mixes lethal force with restraint. Strike to disable, bind with ropes, drag back. If you are taken instead, the journey to captivity is grim. Bound at wrists and neck, sometimes with a wooden yoke, you march in a line through the jungle, prodded by spear points. Upon arrival at the victorious city, the prisoners are paraded through the streets. Crowds line the Sakbiob causeways, jeering, throwing dirt, sometimes striking with sticks. The captives are stripped of finery, heads shaved or painted, forced to dance or perform humiliating acts in the plaza. This public degradation strips away status, making the eventual sacrifice more symbolically potent. The fall from power mirrors the cosmic cycle of death and rebirth. The final act takes place on the temple pyramid. The captive climbs the steep steps, often supported or dragged if injured. At the summit, under the eyes of priests and the king, he is laid on the sacrificial stone. The obsidian knife flashes once. The heart is removed, offered to the sun or the rain god Chak. Blood runs down the channels carved into the stone, pooling at the base where it is collected or smeared on idols. The body may be dismembered, parts distributed to nobles or burned. Skulls join the display racks. The crowd watches in solemn silence more often than frenzy. This is duty, not entertainment. The sacrifice reaffirms the order. The gods are fed. The king's power is proven. The cosmos holds steady for another season. You return from such a raid if you return changed. A successful capture elevates your status slightly. Better maize allotment, a new title like Captor of 3. But the cycle never ends. Your city becomes the target next season. A rival king seeks revenge or needs captives for his own rituals. The raids continue year after year, decade after decade, because stopping would mean failing to pay the gods, losing prestige, inviting drought or defeat. Violence becomes maintenance, the bloody tax that keeps the universe solvent. As you lie in the dark hut, listening to the night settle, you feel the weight of that endless rhythm. The jungle outside is quiet now, but you know the trails are never truly empty. Somewhere, men move with ropes and clubs, hunting for the next offering. And in the morning, the slit drum will call you back to the milpa, where the work continues, as if nothing has changed. But in the morning, the slit drum calls you back to the milpa, where the work continues as if nothing has changed, and the same rhythm that governs your labor also governs what you are allowed to know. Knowledge in this society is not a shared resource. It is a guarded privilege, concentrated in the hands of a small, closed group and deliberately kept out of reach for people like you. The Maya developed the most complex writing system in pre-Columbian America. Their script consists of hundreds of individual glyphs, some logographic, representing whole words, others syllabic, spelling out sounds. A single glyph can combine a head-shaped sign with attached affixes that modify meaning. A typical inscription on a stela or palace wall mixes these elements into dense blocks that must be read in paired columns, top to bottom, left to right. The system required years of training to master. Scribes and priests learned it from childhood, memorizing hundreds of signs, their phonetic values, and the layers of meaning they carried. This was not casual literacy. It was a specialized craft, restricted to a hereditary elite. For the glyphs were never just a way to record information. They held power in themselves. Writing something down, especially a king's name, a royal title, or a ritual date, gave it permanence and force. Carving a ruler's accession on stone was an act of magic as much as documentation. The glyphs invoked the event again each time they were read or even seen. A name written on a stela kept the king present long after death. A captured enemy's defeat inscribed in public view humiliated him across generations. The act of writing was performative. It shaped reality rather than merely described it. The people who controlled this power formed a tight caste. Scribes, often sons of nobles or high-ranking priests, worked in special rooms attached to palaces. They painted on bark paper codices with fine brushes made from animal hair, using black ink from carbon and red from cochineal or hematite. Only a handful of these books survived the Spanish destruction. Most were burned. The surviving examples, Dresden, Madrid, Paris codices, contain astronomical tables tracking Venus cycles, eclipse predictions, almanacs for planting and divination, and ritual instructions. These were not textbooks for the public. They were esoteric manuals, guarded by the priesthood and the royal court. Public writing followed the same logic. Stelae, altars, lintels, and building facades carried long historical texts, but these were not neutral records. They were propaganda. Every inscription glorified the reigning king, linking him to gods and legendary ancestors. A ruler might claim he captured 20 prisoners on a certain date, even if the actual number was lower, because the stone made the claim true in the eyes of the community. The text was read aloud during ceremonies by trained readers, but the ordinary farmer never learned to decipher it himself. You heard the words, you felt their weight, but the shapes on stone remained opaque. Illiteracy was the norm for the vast majority. Archaeological surveys show almost no evidence of writing in common households. No graffiti, no personal notes, no tally marks, beyond simple counts. The system was too intricate and too restricted to spread widely. Learning to read and write would have required years of instruction, access to teachers, and a position that justified the investment. None of those conditions existed for a mill. You remained outside the circle of letters. Myths like the Popol Vuh, which told of creation, the hero twins, and the origins of maize, circulated orally. You knew the stories through elders and ritual performances, but the written versions preserved in codices stayed with the priests. Astronomical knowledge, the most precise in the ancient Americas, followed the same pattern. Venus tables and eclipse warnings were tools of control. A priest announced when the morning star would rise, when to expect rain, when to hold a sacrifice. You depended on their interpretation. Doubt was not an option. This arrangement served a clear purpose. Ignorance kept the social order stable. If the common people could read the stelae, they might question the king's claims. If they understood the calendar calculations, they might challenge the priest's authority over ritual timing. If they learned to write, they could record their own grievances or organize dissent. By keeping knowledge locked away, the elite ensured obedience without constant force. You accepted the world as it was presented because you had no independent means to verify or contradict it. As you bend once more over the maze rows, dirt under your nails and the sun pressing on your back, the distant pyramid stands silent. Its stones are covered in signs you will never read. They speak of victories, divine bloodlines, cosmic debts paid in full. You hear the story secondhand. That is enough. That is all you are meant to have. And in that careful rationing of understanding lies one of the quietest forms of power. Somewhere in the distance, men move with ropes and clubs, but over the generations that quiet hunt for offerings grows heavier. the jungle thicker around abandoned trails until the rhythm itself begins to falter. What historians call the classic Maya collapse was not a sudden invasion or single catastrophe. It unfolded across the 9th and 10th centuries CE as a slow compounding failure of the very system that had once seemed unbreakable. From your perspective, as a mill, standing in fields that no longer yield enough, the change arrives, not as abstract theory, but as empty granaries, silent temples, and the growing realization that the gods have stopped listening. The crisis builds from multiple pressures that reinforce one another. Population in the southern lowlands had risen sharply during the late Classic, perhaps reaching several million in the core zones around Tikal, Calakmul, and Copan. More mouths to feed meant more land cleared, more terraces built, more milpas burned and replanted without sufficient fallow periods. Slash and burn agriculture, sustainable at lower densities, turns destructive at scale. Topsoil erodes down slopes during heavy rains, nutrients leach away, fields become exhausted faster. Maize yields drop year by year. Farmers push into marginal wetlands or steeper hillsides, but the returns diminish. Chronic malnutrition spreads wider, weakening bodies already strained by parasites and infections. Then the climate shifts. Paleoclimate records from lake sediments and speleothems show prolonged droughts, beginning around 800–900 CE, some lasting decades. Rainfall decreases by 20 to 40% in key periods. The wet season rains that fill reservoirs and swell rivers arrive late or not at all. Cenotes and aguadas, artificial reservoirs dug near cities, drop to mud. Maize planted in hope withers in cracked earth. The priests perform every ritual they know. More auto-sacrifice, more captives offered, more incense burned, but the clouds do not gather. The sun rises each day indifferent. This failure strikes at the core promise of the divine contract. The Ahar and his priests had built legitimacy on the claim that their blood and observances kept the cosmic engine running. When rain stops and crops fail despite intensified offerings, doubt creeps in. People whisper that the kings have lost favor, that the gods are angry or simply absent. In some polities, the elite respond by demanding even more tribute, more maize, more cloth, more labor for new temples to appease the heavens. But the milpa produces less, not more. Resentment builds. The social pyramid, once stable because everyone believed in the system's necessity, begins to crack under its own weight. Evidence from sites like Aguateca and Cancuén shows signs of abrupt abandonment and violence in the terminal phase. In some places, elite residences are burned, royal tombs looted, stelae toppled or defaced. At Dos Pilas, texts record escalating wars and captive-taking right up to the end, but then the records stop. In the southern lowlands, monumental construction ceases after about 810–830 CE in many centers. Population plummets, some areas lose 90% of their inhabitants over a century or two. People do not vanish, they disperse into smaller groups, moving north to the Yucatan or into less exhausted zones, adopting simpler lifeways. From your viewpoint on the ground, the collapse feels personal and terrifying. The priests climb the pyramids less often, their chants thinner. No new stelae rise proclaiming victories or accessions. The king's messengers come less frequently for tribute because there is little left to take. When they do demand, the village elders hesitate, then refuse. Small uprisings flare attacks on noble compounds, stolen granaries, families fleeing into the forest, rather than face starvation under old obligations. You watch neighbors pack what they can carry and disappear along overgrown Sac-Biop. The ball court falls silent. The market plaza empties. Temples, once alive with smoke and drum beats, stand empty, vines creeping up the steps. Rain finally returns in patches, but too late the soil is gone. The seed stock eaten, the knowledge of intensive farming techniques lost with the specialists who once directed it. Hunger turns chronic into famine. Children die first, then the old. Bodies weaken further. Diseases spread unchecked in crowded, malnourished groups. You bury family members in shallow graves near the hut because no one has strength for proper ceremonies. The calendar still turns days named Imix or Khan Pass, but without the full apparatus of priests and scribes, its meaning phrase. Rituals shrink to household level, a drop of blood on a maize cob, a whispered prayer. The grand cosmic participation you once felt part of shrinks to desperate hope. The cities you knew become tombs. Tikal's great plazas fill with blowing leaves and animal tracks. Palenque's palaces crack under root pressure. Copan's stele lean, half buried. The world you were born into, the one that demanded total alignment, with calendar, king, and cosmos, ends not in fire or flood, but in quiet withdrawal. People adapt by leaving behind the hypertrophied system that could no longer sustain them. You sit one evening on the edge of an abandoned milpa, watching the sun set behind overgrown pyramids that no longer call for offerings. The jungle is reclaiming what it lent, stone by stone. And in that silence, the old certainties dissolve, leaving only the need to find enough to eat tomorrow. The sun sets behind overgrown pyramids that no longer call for offerings, and in that silence, the old certainties dissolve, leaving only the need to find enough to eat tomorrow. Yet tomorrow comes, and with it the descendants of those who once carried baskets of maize up temple steps or bled themselves on stone altars. They did not vanish when the cities emptied, they adapted. Small groups moved north into the drier Yucatan, where cenotes provided reliable water, and the soil held longer under less intense cultivation. Others stayed in pockets of the southern lowlands, shifting to simpler slash-and-burn cycles with longer fallows. They reduced tribute demands, loosened the grip of divine kingship, and focused on survival rather than cosmic maintenance. The great centers Tikal, Palenque, Copan became overgrown ruins, but the people endured. Today, millions of Maya speakers across Guatemala, Belize, Mexico, and Honduras trace their ancestry to those who walked away from the hypertrophied system when it could no longer feed them. Their legacy persists in quiet, enduring forms. The hieroglyphic script remains only partially deciphered. Even now, scholars argue over certain signs, while the remaining codices, Dresden, Madrid, Paris, preserve astronomical tables of startling precision. Venus cycles, eclipse predictions, and agricultural almanacs show a mathematical sophistication that rivals anything in the ancient Old World. The 260-day Tzolk'in and 365-day Hab still guide traditional farming and ritual in many communities. Myths like those in the Popol Vuh, recorded in the 16th century but rooted in classic-era beliefs, continue to shape worldview. The creation from maize, the trials of the hero twins, the necessity of balance between human action and divine will. These threads connect past to present, carried forward not by stone monuments but by oral tradition, woven into modern languages and ceremonies. So why would you not have lasted a single day in that world? Because thriving there demanded absolute surrender to the jungle's suffocating grip, to the calendar's unyielding schedule, to the hierarchy that placed kings as gods and farmers as fuel. There was no space for the individual to pause, to question, to seek personal comfort over collective obligation. Every breath tied you to the land's demands, constant labor to coax maize from thin soil, endless vigilance against insects and disease, rituals that made your smallest actions part of cosmic upkeep. Doubt was dangerous. Hesitation invited failure not just for you, but for everyone. The elite bled themselves to prove commitment, but you bled through malnutrition, overwork, and the quiet threat of becoming the next captive. This was not harmony with nature. It was an exhausting, often bloody negotiation, clearing forest to plant, offering blood to coax rain, capturing neighbors to feed the gods so the sun would rise again. Survival came at the price of individuality, privacy, and any illusion of control over your own fate. Modern life offers buffers, medicine, machines, choice, distance from the immediate consequences of weather or ritual failure. You can step back, reflect, rest. In their world, stepping back meant collapse. The Maya who built those pyramids did not live in gentle equilibrium with their environment. They fought a daily war against it and against each other, to keep the fragile balance intact. When the war became unsustainable, they let the great structures fall silent and found new ways forward. As the night deepens and the jungle sounds fill the quiet around you, imagine those ruins still standing under the same stars they once tracked so carefully. The stones are mute now, but the questions they raise remain. What would we give up to keep our own world turning? And how much of ourselves would we surrender before deciding it was too much?